Okay, good afternoon, everybody. As Dietrich told you, my name's Dov Isaacs. I've been at Adobe 27 years. PostScript language level 2 was first coming out when I joined, and the world was very, very different. We're not going to get into very technical details this afternoon, but rather an overview of pretty much PDF for print as it moves into PDF 2.0, some of the things driving some of these particular features, and then into PDFX in terms of what does that mean as a sort of a subset of PDF itself. I think I can get through this in 45 minutes. I do talk very quickly. I was born in New York. So I will try to speak distinctly as well. And what I'd ask for is that you hold the questions to the end. If we run out of time, I'll be here during the break and everything, and you can more than happy to answer any questions at that particular time. Okay. Start off with some background. First of all, contrary to the pundits in the industry, print is not dead, but it is changing dramatically. But we have to distinguish between what I'll call the old print and the new print. The old print was basically books, magazines, newspapers, manuals, marketing collateral, reports, calendars, etc. And it was overwhelmingly a paper substrate. In other words, you printed on paper. You didn't. Other things could be printed on, was primarily paper, dead trees. Is overwhelmingly plate-based, offset, gravure, some flexo. Digital printing was relegated to short runs, proofs, and enterprise printing. Enterprise in the office. In other words, low-end laser printers. The typical characteristic of printing commercially was you printed long runs and you put the copies in a warehouse and you distributed what you had. Of course, that had the side effect of ending up with an awful lot of waste. And you wanted to change something, oh goodness, I have 500,000 copies of this in the warehouse. Okay, well, we'll change it, we'll print these things again, and you throw the rest of that paper into recycle. Design content was for particular print conditions. Okay, CMYK as it came down from Mount Sinai with Moses. Okay, RGB was sort of a thing you didn't want to talk about. Of course, you could have spot colors for specialized print jobs, but that was the world of printing at the time. And it was primarily device-dependent PostScript and very early PDF workflows. So this is what we look at as the old type of print. Okay, and this is the type of thing, when people say print is dead, this is the stuff that's typically going away. But what's more important is the new print. And the new print is basically a lot of what used to be the old print is migrating to the screen. In other words, a newspaper, after 50 years of subscribing to a newspaper, I finally gave up my subscription at home because for any number of reasons, besides the fact it was poorly printed and the ink got all over me. Increasingly, what's important in printing are things such as signage, textiles, specialized, personalized items of all different varieties. Okay, it's not what we used to print. It's not just on paper anymore. It's print on anything and everything, and some paper as well. But we're looking at things that aren't the classical type of substrates that we used. It's increasingly digital and wide format printing, facilitating every copy being different. In other words, there's none of this create a plate that's good for 500,000 copies and the overhead of doing that. Every page can be different, and the cost of making every page different is zero. Okay? Increasingly, it's print on demand or short runs. In other words, the idea of long runs and put them in the warehouse is gone. Okay? Typically, you print a few copies and distribute those, or even it's totally print on demand. Many books. You go to Amazon, for example, to buy a book, assuming you don't want to get an electronic version. What typically happens is they print one copy digitally, including the cover. Design, which used to be primarily for print, is increasingly for both print and the web. The same assets have to be used for both. Okay, and that means increasingly the content is color managed RGB. I know some of the people who have a print background, they have allergies to this, they don't like it, but that is the reality of what's going on. There's a higher level of graphic complexity. We put transparency into the imaging model back at the turn of the century, and what happened? People use it. And of course that causes all sorts of interesting issues. And the PDF workflows and the print workflows are primarily based on more recent versions of PDF, not the older types of things that were more just PostScript, very self-contained. Okay, well, let's then talk about a subset of PDF called PDFX. I assume people here know generally what that is. Anyone who doesn't? Let me ask one other question, because this is important in terms of what I talk about. How many of you are in the print industry? Okay. How many of you are developers of software that either create, consume, or work on PDF? Some of you have dual split personalities. Good. How many of you think you're here for a wedding? Good. No. Okay. So you're in the right place. Okay. I just wanted to know so I know who I'm. How many of you are in management? Okay. We'll forgive that. Okay. Okay. So PDFX, what is that about? It's really a subset of the full PDF specification for use in printing, very simply stated. The graphic arts industry needed a means of providing a reliable exchange of graphic content for printing. And there was some real concern as to what would be reliable. It limits what PDF features may be used. In other words, you can't, for PDF files, the current PDFX files, I should say, we don't allow you to do things like embedding movies. On the other hand, I don't know of any RIP that'll play a movie or print a movie as part of a press run. Fonts must be embedded. Now, those of you who know English, font is a four-letter word beginning with F. Okay, and the original idea behind PDF was that we could have small files by allowing fonts to be FAUXed, F-A-U-X-E-D. In other words, if you didn't embed a font, we put information about the type of font it was, and we would do substitutions for you. For screen purposes, this may have been okay, but as we went longer into time, certainly for print production, this was somewhat of a folly, and it turned out to be a problem. So PDFX wanted to have full exchange, the X in exchange. Fonts had to be embedded, including those which were considered the base 14. 4 faces of Times, 4 faces of Helvetica, 4 faces of Courier, and Symbol, plus ITC Zap Dingbats. PDFX specifies how these types of files are identified. In other words, you can look at the file with software and determine immediately whether it is claiming to be a PDFX file. It doesn't tell you whether it really conforms to that specification, but there's an identification there. And it really addresses the concerns, many of them well-founded, about unconstrained PDF for printing. In other words, the print industry felt good about this, and that was rather important in order to get this type of thing being used as opposed to PostScript. One thing that was very important about PDF as opposed to PostScript was PDF was deterministic. What does that mean? It meant that first of all, each page was individual and you could be directly addressed, and that there were no variables in there. In other words, PostScript is a programming language. You could conceivably check on how many, what phase of the moon it was, or how many sunspots there are, or what temperature is outside through external devices, and change your formatting based on that. I know that's somewhat wild, but the language actually allows that type of thing to occur. Plus it has a random number generator in it. That doesn't work too well for printing. Okay, well, over time, PDFX evolved. In the days of around 1999, when the first PDF X1 came out, you were dealing with a totally opaque imaging model. If you wanted to have transparency effects, what you typically did was you used overprinting. And of course, that has all sorts of interesting ramifications as well. Color management was only in its infancy and was not typically used or relied upon. And certainly, most commercial printing was offset press using film to plate or the emerging computer to plate technologies. What's the present? The present, transparency is all over the place. You think you're doing something simple in Microsoft Word and you get transparency for some unknown reason. People want to be able to repurpose content in general, and PDF is a requirement for that. Digital printing processes challenge offset printing. No, digital printing has not taken over, but in fact, it's certainly becoming a major factor in printing. Certainly, the new printing is primarily going towards digital. Color management is no longer really optional. Why? Two reasons. One of which is basically that we are dealing with content that's provided, that's being created for both print and display, and the other is something that most of you have in your pocket or wherever, a digital camera. Digital cameras don't produce CMYK. They produce ICC color managed RGB. Okay, so the idea is basically that you have to be able to handle this. And the thing is that all recently vintage RIPs, or DFEs, digital front ends, directly support ICC color management and transparency in PDF. So there's a major difference between what we had when PDF started and what we have in the modern times. Okay, to sort of give you a, well, this presentation will be available for you to download, right, teacher? Okay, so the details there are sort of, might be hard to see from the back, but this is sort of going from PostScript to PDF X4 and X5, how we evolved and the various features. What version of PDF it was based upon, what type of color support is in there, color management, whether it supports transparency, whether it supports layers, page-independent access. All PDF is page-independent access, which is good. Blind exchange, whether it's fully self-contained. Job control, how do you control the jobs? Okay, typically PDF is totally controlled from the outside. PostScript, your tray selection was done from inside the job, which was rather interesting. Image and object optimization. PostScript, no, there was no such thing. In PDF, there's something called X-objects, which are very good to allow you to define once and reference any number of times. Typical file sizes went lower, and in terms of characterization, PostScript was highly device dependent. As we move over time to PDF X4 and X5, we're more device independent. Okay, well, let's go back to PDF itself. What is PDF 2.0? With a number of sessions here talking about that, I'm going to just give a summary of the basics and then what are the print features that you need to know about. Well, in terms of, it's an ISO standard 32000-2. It's the responsibility of ISO TC 171, Subcommittee 2, Working Group 8. They met this past week here in Berlin. The final draft international standard passed vote earlier this year, and it's somewhere around 950 something pages. What it'll actually be when it comes out of the ISO editing, that's a lot of specification. It's not something you want to read before you go to sleep. It's not pretty. Actually, it'll put you to sleep. Thank you. The actual publication date, actually, we were being somewhat pessimistic. It'll probably be out within a month. We got special dispensation from ISO. They took a look at this mess and said, no, you guys take care of it. We'll agree with you. Okay, so there was cooperation, and we expect to see this coming out really soon. It's really the first new version of the PDF specification since PDF 1.7 became ISO-fied. I don't think there's such a word, in 2008. 2008, Adobe donated the PDF specification, PDF 1.7, to ISO to make it an international standard. And at that time, we had a fast-track publication of that specification become the first ISO PDF. Going from the ISO 32000-1 to 32000-2 has been 8 freaking years in development. This is one of the longest processes there's been to actually come up with the next version. Okay, well, what's new and different? Well, first of all, we had to do isosification of the specification document. Those who've ever read specifications, Adobe's was sort of difficult to read. It becomes an ISO specification, it becomes even more difficult to read. So we had to make sure that it was difficult to read. There are very many corrections and clarifications of the ISO 32000-1 text. Okay, and the number of edits back and forth were just unbelievable. There was a formal adoption of new and augmented features. Some of them were extensions to PDF 1.7 that Adobe put in, and you saw those in Acrobat 8 and 9 and 10. Okay, some of them were things that came from other PDF subset specifications. There was something called D parts that came from PDF VT for variable and transactional printing. And other features were put in for a wide variety of PDF use cases. For things other than printing, other sessions will tell you about them. We'll talk about the print ones. There were also corrections, clarifications, augmentation of certain existing features in PDF, and the word deprecation, which means we're pushing something out, not necessarily supporting it anymore, of what we would consider obsolete features. The best example of that is something called XFA forms. Those were forms that were created by something called Lifecycle Designer and from Adobe. Those, although it's not going to stop a PDF file from being displayed, we're strongly discouraging their use, and you can be a compliant PDF 2.0 viewer or processor without supporting that particular feature. Okay, well, what about PDF 2.0 features for print? Well, there's something called black point compensation. It was originally an Adobe extension to ICC color management and was never a part of PDF, but typically for Adobe workflows, we either globally enabled it or disabled it in our renderers and our applications. Most people have no idea what I'm even talking about unless you're a color scientist, but it relates to how the black renders when you convert from something like an ICC color managed RGB to a final destination color space, typically CMYK plus a spot color or 2 or 3. Okay, it's a methodology for creating these adjustments for the maximum black, and it's now an ISO standard. It's ISO standard 18619. And I can't memorize all these numbers, so I have friends who do. Ask Leonard. Leonard Rosenthal can spew out all the numbers and what the standards are. But black point compensation is now an ISO standard. So it was added into the PDF 2.0 specification. I'm not going to read this for you, but if you want to read it when it comes out in the spec, this says basically what happens. At this particular point, what you're now able to do is effectively specify whether black point compensation is being used at a page level or even at an object level. Okay, so that you could conceivably say, well, I have an image, an RGB image that I really want this on, and I have something else I want it off. It's actually part of what's known as the extended graphic state in PDF, and as such, conceivably, you can have a page where you're turning black point compensation on and off or whatever as you see fit. What's the difference with the way it looks? The experts will tell you they know. Okay, so we've met their needs for this. Okay, well, and it's available for all PDF 2.0 files. In other words, you don't have to have PDFX for this. But since PDFX6 will be based upon PDF 2.0, if you want to use PDFX, you have to use PDFX6 to get this feature in your PDF workflow. Okay, well, what does this mean for workflow applications? For any of you who are developing software, at the minimum, these settings have to be passed through. So in other words, if I have something with black point compensation specified on and something with it off, and I place it in a layout program, I can't ignore it. I have to pass that through to the output, the final PDF output. So if you look at what you have to suddenly know about, you can't just ignore this. You have to pass it through. Or if you're not, you'd better warn the users about that. Um, at a minimum, an application's color management system has to set an initial state for this. Okay, typically it defaults to whatever the RIP or the workflow system has. You want it on, that typically would be something your application has to be able to specify. Okay, one of the things that people who are developing software have to figure out is, does anybody care? Is it important to my application? So what is the granularity I'm going to support? Suppose I have a famous layout program. We're not going to mention the program that starts with an I, either one of the two. Do I allow every object to have a status turning black point compensation on or off? Or do I do it at an object level, or do I do it at the page or the artboard level? These are things that you have to figure out for any application that you're doing. And obviously, we have to figure it out as well. And certainly, if you have such an application, you need to look at your file format. Do you have a way of putting this information in there? Let's say you allowed it to be turned on in Photoshop. Well, you have to have a way of putting it in a TIFF file or a JPEG file and some sort of metadata, let's say, so that when you place that into something else, that particular state is known about. Or perhaps have ways of overriding it. It isn't so simple. In other words, there are lots of things we have to worry about before we actually can get to use these types of features. Okay, transparency. It's not a four-letter word, but it sometimes seems like it. We introduced that into the PDF imaging model in Adobe PDF 1.4. It's unchanged all the way through PDF 1.7 from Adobe, and subsequently in the first ISO PDF version. However, for PDF 2.0, there's some major interesting things that happen. First of all, the section describing transparency has been totally rewritten for your fun and entertainment. There are no new features per se, but it includes implications of what do you do for transparency blending when you have a black point compensation on or off, or a mixture of those things. That's just another little thing that had to be described. Corrections to the specification to match actual implementations. Two of the 16 blend modes, color dodge and color burn, not used all that often, had implementations didn't quite match what was in the specification. The specification has now been changed to match what everyone was actually doing. Clarification to eliminate ambiguity of the specification, part of which is something known as the color space inheritance model. You have a document, you have, let's say, an output intent, and you have pages that might have a page level blending space, and you have objects underneath it, groups, transparency groups. When it comes down to it, what do you do the blending in? What color space do you do the blending in? So this is now very explicit in the PDF 2.0 specification. Now this is applicable to all PDF 2.0, not just PDFX, but PDFX will inherit these particular changes. Now the good news is, unless you do weird things like writing test files like my friend Stefan Yagi here does, you're probably not going to notice too many of these changes. But every so often, you know, if there's 16 blend modes, you're going to find somebody using one of the graphic arts products who tries using them all, and will probably stumble into something that the specification is fixed. Okay, considerations, what things that you should worry about if you're developing software for this. This is going to sound very sexy, but you want to avoid promiscuous use of transparency groups to avoid unintended results and overhead. I'll give you an example. Microsoft Office, when you save as a PDF from there, they typically take the entire page, call it a transparency group, and put a blending space on it of some type of RGB. Sound good? No. Even if it doesn't have any transparency, because you might actually have gray in there, depending on which version of Orifice you're using. You might actually have R equals G equals B coming out as grayscale, and other things as RGB, and what happens? Where you're doing the blending. You're doing the blending in RGB. What happens to your gray? Okay, comes to printing, you're screwed. It really is a problem. So you want to avoid stupid things like that. If you don't need to specify a transparency blending space someplace, don't do it. If you don't need a transparency group, don't do it. Okay? Hierarchies, in other words, what's inherited from that I previously discussed in terms of the color spaces coming down from the document, pages, groups within groups, etc. You have to look out for those things. And the fewer things that you specify, probably the better off you will be. Okay. Another PDF 2.0 feature for print, page level output intents. This is something that basically is really designed for digital printing, or printing where you want to take a PDF file and have multiple page types in it. Okay, content that's being printed on different types of pages. Okay, and output intents at the document level are something that had already been in PDF specification. If you don't have a subset, in other words, just plain PDF, it's not PDFX, it's not PDFA, it's not PDFE, it means nothing. It can be in there, but a viewer doesn't have to deal with it at all. It specifically was designed for these subsets that wanted to do something with it for color management. It defines the default transparency blending color space, which is typically where you're going. In other words, a certain type of press with a certain CMYK characterization. Okay, so how it was originally done at the document level, assume that the entire document was being rendered on a particular set of print conditions. This doesn't work too well as you go into the future. In PDF 2.0, we added the capability of providing an output intent at the page level. So what that means is that if you have a document that requires an output intent, okay, in other words, PDFX for the example, since that's what we're talking about, you either put a output intent at the document level, or you put one on every single page. They can be the same, they could be different. Or, to make things more interesting, you could specify one at the document level, and then for individual pages, have an output intent that overrides the document one. Where would you want to do this? I'll give you an example. I have a book. The book has text pages in it. The book has color plate pages in the middle of it. The book has a cover. And I make this all as one big honkin' PDF file. Okay? The printing conditions for the cover are very different. The substrate is very different. It might actually go to a different type of printer. You can have a RIP that basically sends these pages here, the black and white pages to this monochrome high-speed device, and the color plate pages, illustration pages, to yet another device. So I do want to have a difference in how I'm specifying the output color space and how the conversion for many ICC color managed RGB will be performed. So this is again towards the new print. I want to have a single PDF file, the whole book. This does it and allows me to do the print operations as well. Okay. This is also used in something called depart, which we'll get into. Similarly, it is used for determining where this will go. Okay. It also requires PDFX 6 as opposed to earlier versions of PDFX because it relies on PDF 2.0 and PDFX4 relies on PDF 1.6. Okay. What are the considerations on this? This is even worse. You have a problem whereby if I'm placing content, I have to really start looking at, I'm placing a page out of a thing, what's the output intent of the document it's coming from? What's the output intent of that particular page? This becomes rather important. Okay? And maybe some of the things we hadn't been looking at in the past in terms of this becomes increasingly important. Okay, we have to reconcile place content of what you have, what you're placing with what you're placing into. That means we might have to offer some options when you place a page from a PDF X file into, let's say, InDesign, Illustrator, whatever. You name your favorite application. But this isn't so easy. There are multiple choices of how you want to do it. Give you an example. If I place a page that has an output intent of swap CMYK into a FOGRA document, what do? Well, one of the things that was predisposition was, well, we'll make this a transparency group, and we're going to say that it's a swap transparency group, and they'll be taking care of it, the RIP. Well, that messes things up because the RGB that was in that page that you're bringing in will have a smaller gamut for its conversion first to swap and then from swap to FOGRA. You want to do that? No. So there are other possibilities. You convert everything that's coming in to the resultant, all the CMYK, maybe using device links to the final color CMYK color space of the output intent of the container, maybe. But these are things that you have to consider. It's not so simple. And certainly the applications that support multiple pages have to be re-engineered to understand that each page may be different in terms of its color space. Typically, your applications, oh, my document, it's FOGRA for this and Adobe RGB for that, and 20% dot gain for gray. That no longer applies. I have to be able to potentially say each page potentially has a different color space. And also it gets interesting when you display the pages. I showed the bottom of one page and the top of the next. It means that displaying that on the screen, I'm having to basically switch between color spaces. That's why my hair is going much lighter and going away. Okay. Well, there's also some enhancements to the output intent dictionary. What's an output intent dictionary, you may ask? Well, that's the structure in the PDF file that stores the output intent profile. But there are other things that we've added to that in PDF 2.0. We've added a mixing hints dictionary. We've also added support for spectral data. Spectral data is something that you typically would have in a CXF X4 spot color characterization file. And this is another ISO standard, ISO 17972-4, recently, relatively recently inaugurated. Why would you do this? Well, the typical spot color definitions are not particularly good for proofing. And the CXF data is much more, I'm not going to get into the details of it, but provide much better data for you to be able to proof onto, let's say, a digital proofer or even on the screen. Okay, so this is now an optional part of the output intent, both at the page level and at the document level. So we're getting reasonably complex here. Okay, it turns out that the PDF 2.0 specification excuse me, doesn't say what you actually do with this data, but it's there for those who are practitioners of this. Okay, what will it require for the output intent dictionary enhancements? Well, it requires PDF X6 because PDF X4 is based on PDF 1.7 and it doesn't know what these things are at all. Considerations in the workflow, you had to pass this information through, just like the page level and the document level output intents. You have to reconcile maybe some conflicting definitions of things coming in versus what you have at in the rest of your document. And certainly the renderers need to learn about the spectral data. Now, it might be able to ignore it. Okay, I could assure you that something like Acrobat on a cell phone is not going to worry about representation of spot colors too well. It's not that important at this particular point. Okay, to support these types of dictionaries, it's also true that let's say spot color definitions in applications might also have to be expanded to have support for the mixing hints as well as the CXF data. So again, it's not so simple as just a PDF feature. You're changing the workflow, you're changing the data structures. Okay, document parts. This is a new feature of PDF 2.0, but it existed beforehand. It's a facility that we invented for PDF VT, for variable transactional data, such that in a personalized document, we were able to have different types of pages. Okay, so again, let's suppose you're doing a personalized brochure, let's say from the PDF Association. The cover has your name on it, and then the text page is in the middle. They're different sizes, and there's an envelope, and all sorts of things like that. You want to be able to associate a particular page type with some outside information, such as, where do I print this thing? Okay, in PostScript you had something called set page device that went in there that allowed you to choose the tray and whatever. Do you want to do that in PDF? No. You want to be able to say, this type of page is a cover, and this is text, and this is my envelope. And you want some sort of outside job control, maybe JDF or something similar, to say, cover? Yeah, that goes to this printer on this size paper with these sorts of conditions. The text pages, that's a different type of paper pulled from tray 3 from whatever. But you don't want to put the device-dependent stuff in the PDF file. So this allows you to associate different types of pages with something that a job ticket would be able to shovel off to the right particular physical manifestation. Okay, so we have this already for PDF VT, but only specialized applications know what it's about. XMPy has a plugin to InDesign, for example, that basically uses the master pages as a way of tagging things. And that goes into this depart information. Depart can also be used to do pseudo searches and variable data types of records, but we're not going to get into that particular detail. But this is something that we're adding. It's officially part of PDF 2.0, and it will require PDFX6 if you want to use it in a PDFX, and it's typically used with page-level output intents, okay, because differences in page types. Okay, it turns out there's another TC130 ISO group working on a specification for this. It's going to be standard 2.1.8.1.2. My friend Martin Bailey from Global Graphics is chairing that group and looking at the implications of what do you put in that metadata so that you get the right correspondence between page type and job ticketing. Okay, well, what does that mean in terms of applications? Well, we have to wait for that other specification to be done. All this stuff must be reconciled in whatever RIP you have. Even if you're printing, let's say, to a PostScript printer from Acrobat, for example. 5 minutes, oh boy, I better move it. Even if you're just printing to a PostScript printer, it has multiple trays, so you might have to, for printing to things that aren't PDF printers, aren't something that understands this, have ways of matching that with job tickets and printers. Okay? And similarly, you have to worry about what happens when you place. Okay, there's something called Halftone Origin for advanced people. This is basically something you can specify in terms of patterns and images as to where the phase starts so that you have things in synchronization. It has become part of the extended graphic state. Again, it'll be available in PDFX6, but not in any earlier versions of PDFX. Okay, quickly, what is PDFX6? It's the next PDFX standard under development. It's currently in a committee draft stage. Publication, we're thinking anywhere from the end, at this particular point, end of 2018 to early 2019. We want to get it right. Okay, it's the first new part of the PDFX specification since 2010, when we had PDFX4 and X5. There are 3 conformance levels. PDFX6, everything is fully self-contained. 6P allows external output intent profiles. 6N allows external output intents for N colorants. Okay, note that there's no analog to PDF X5G and PG. Why? Because no one ever used those standards. The idea there was to effectively allow you to have graphics that were described elsewhere as a PDF file. Well, we've gotten PDF generations so good these days that people have found it didn't buy all that much. Plus, it was somewhat undependent, very undependable to assume that you can access a PDF file that might be in Timbuktu somewhere. Okay, you're printing hundreds of pages a minute. You can't. You want everything there. So it was not fully self-contained. Okay, it'll likely be the base. PDF X6 will also likely be the basis for an updated version of PDF VT1. And that group will be meeting in Toronto in a few weeks. Okay, what's different? Else is different. It's based on PDF 2.0. Inherits all the features of PDF 2.0 unless specifically prohibited. Improves certain things for digital print workflows. Specification is more in line with PDF-A. You've heard about PDF-A a bit earlier, and you'll hear more about it over the next day or so. But those two subsets are much more in alignment now. The wording is very similar, except for things that are very specific to one or the other. And in many cases, you can actually have a PDF-X file that's also a PDF-A file. You could tag it as both, which is very nice, very useful. Okay, another thing that's interesting is we're allowing certain things like annotations. You could put a movie annotation in now, as long as you have something that, serves as a proxy. Let's say the title frame for it. Why not? No good reason for it not to be there. Same is true with forms. One of the problems people had, people were using PDF forms and wanted to print them, and you couldn't make a PDF-X file out of a form. We now allow that. There's some restrictions, but this allows something like that to be done. Okay, and sort of to wrap things up, this is what the new table looks like with PDF X6 in it, where basically we're going all the way to the right. We have many more features. It's more dependable. It allows much more that we need for the new print as opposed to the old print. Going in the future, PDF X6 will likely be a basis for PDF VT1 update. Certainly, we're looking at things in terms of how do we deal with packaging and labels. There's work being done on that at this particular time. What's going to happen with color management? There's some work being done for a new ICC color management system called ICC Max, where Max is the name of the guy who did it, but it's also maximum support for color. That's in the future for PDF, as well as ultimately probably some PDF-X. And there's cooperation between a number of groups in terms of the PDF base specification, PDF, which is TC171, the group that does printing, ISO TC130, ICC, which for color management, CIP4 for job ticketing, the PDF Association, where you're here right now, the Ghent Work Group, IDEA Alliance, and other industry standard groups and associations. And I will also say that you can't complain if you don't actively participate. One closing observation. Many of the problems we have in the print industry have nothing to do in terms of what's in a PDF specification. Okay? I've always wondered, why are the guys at a print show always wiping down the presses? You see these guys, wiping with these rags and stuff. It's because the printers go and drool over the printers. They're really into hardware as opposed to workflow. And that's a problem. They don't update their workflows, their education, and there's sort of a Luddite attitude. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. So we tend to see a lot of printers who have modern workflows, believe it or not, but still require PDF X1A, in other words, ruined transparency and no color management. We've seen people still on their websites requiring PDF files to have outlined text, which is stupid. I'll say it, stupid. And I've even seen things where people say, well, no, we only allow PDF that has gone through distillation of PostScript. And by the way, it has to come from Macintosh, which also makes no sense whatsoever. And very much blame the customer attitudes. So anyway, I'm probably only 1 minute over. I'm close. Okay. Thank you so very much. I'll be around here later today or rest this afternoon. And my friend Stefan Yagi, you're next.